Hey guys, it's Libby, and hoo boy, has it been a long time since we had the last Bard Book Club video, but I am finally ready to talk about Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. And it is this play specifically that has caused the delay in this video, not any sort of general Bard burnout. Yeah, so rereading this play to do this video, this is the first time I've actually read the play in quite a few years. I've seen it on stage and on film several times, but in that case, you're always getting the mediation from the director. So when I reread the play a couple of months ago, I was like, shit man, this is definitely anti-Semitic. And I am absolutely not going to make a video that's like, this play is anti-Semitic, but. So I had to figure out how to talk about this, and you know, it's taken me 6 months, however long it's been. And finally, a meme came to the rescue. So I'm going to use the galaxy brain meme to explain Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, or at least the anti-Semitism in it. But first I do want to give you a little bit of historical context. First I'm going to talk about Shakespeare's England, and then I'm going to talk about Shylock's Venice. 400 years before Merchant of Venice was written, in the year 1290, King Edward I expelled all the Jews from England. So for the entirety of Shakespeare's lifetime, there were technically no Jews in his home country, and we don't think he went to any other countries. Now, of course, there were some people, mainly from the Iberian Peninsula, who were living temporarily or permanently in London for trade purposes, for merchanting. And while they were born Sephardic Jews and may personally have continued to hold to Jewish belief systems, they were at least performing Christianity. So we should expect Shakespeare's approach to writing Shylock to be different than his approach to writing, say, Othello, who's another person with a different demographic, because Shakespeare almost certainly had spoken to Black people, and if not, he had at least seen plenty of them in London. Now over to Shylock's Venice. Venice at the time of Shakespeare's writing was an independent city-state. It had not expelled the Jews, and the Italian peninsula in fact had a fairly healthy Jewish population ever since the Roman conquest of Judea. But even though Italian Jews were not expelled, they still lived quite separate lives from the Gentile populations of the Italian city-states. And a lot of this applied to the laws and bylaws that effectively regulated and limited how Jewish people could earn money. So first off, legally, Jews were not allowed to own land, so that removes the possibility of agriculture from the industries they could pursue. They were also not permitted to take any jobs in the government, and while most areas didn't have official state laws preventing Jews from joining artisans' guilds, many of the guilds had their own bylaws and regulations preventing Jews from joining. So one of the few ways for Jewish people to earn money in medieval and early modern Italy was to take up Shylock's profession, which is usury. Usury is specifically lending money at interest. This is why Shylock and Antonio hate each other in The Merchant of Venice. Antonio is, as a Christian, not permitted by church law to do any usury. So he lends out money not at interest. He basically just like gives people money and hopes that eventually they'll be able to give it back to him. So for Antonio, lending money is not a profession. It's something he does out of friendliness. And this is undercutting Shylock's profession. Shylock is financially dependent on other people being in debt to him, which, as you can imagine, made the Jews not very popular. And this brings us to Galaxy Brain. So I am not going to be answering the question of, is this play anti-Semitic or is it not? I'm going to be discussing elements of the play that are anti-Semitic, elements of the play that are counter-anti-Semitic, ambiguous elements, and I'm going to use the meme as a framework to contextualize them. In case you are my mom and are not familiar with the Galaxy Brain meme, basically it's actually intended to be used ironically. I'm actually not going to be using it ironically here. It's basically this is what a person with a tiny brain thinks, this is what a normal person thinks. Oh no, brain's lighting up, you really got something going. Wow, your brain has enveloped the entire galaxy. It's a dumb to smart chart. And it's actually Shakespeare's brain that we're going to be talking about here. So basically you can decide how much credit you want to give William Shakespeare. And it's perfectly okay to, like me, not have a solid answer. Like, I don't know how much Shakespeare was trying to present anti-Semitism in order to refute it. So the small brain approach is, this play is anti-Semitic. It clearly makes use of anti-Semitic tropes, and whether intentionally or not, would increase hatred towards the Jewish people. Even though there at least weren't supposed to be any Jewish people in England, there are plenty of Jewish characters in English fiction. So English literature does have a broad array of character tropes that were applied to Jewish people. You can find these in The Nun's Tale in Chaucer's Canterbury Tale, as well, where in that one the Jews are trying to like murder a precious Christian child. And then in more contemporary to Shakespeare, there's Christopher Marlowe's The Jew of Malta, where the titular character kind of goes on a murder spree. And this literary tradition of tropes is also complemented by like folklore and superstitions that continental people had about Jewish people that got spread, like actual Jewish people that were living in their countries, that got spread into the British Isles as well. So the first one is that Jewish people are money grubbing. This association likely comes from the fact that a lot of medieval and early modern Jews were in the usury business, so they were holding a lot of Christians' money, which the Christians began to resent. And this trope definitely applies to Shylock. When his daughter runs away with a bunch of his money, he says, why there, a diamond gone, it cost me 2,000 ducats in Frankfurt. The curse never fell upon our nation till now, I never felt it till now, 2,000 ducats in that, and other precious, precious jewels. I would my daughter were dead at my foot, and the jewels in her ear. I would she were hearsed at my foot, and the ducats in her coffin. I don't really see a way to spin that into anything sympathetic. Another trope about Jewish characters is that they were the killers of Christ. So before Shakespeare's type of plays were happening, the theatrical tradition in England was largely religious. So people would put on scenes from the Bible or from other elements of Catholic lore, which would include Christ's trial before Pontius Pilate, in which all of the Jewish characters, Jesus of course not identified as a Jewish character, even though he for sure was, if he existed, not getting into that one. All the Jewish characters are yelling at Pilate that they want Jesus to die, die, die. And the court scene in The Merchant of Venice actually bears remarkable similarities to the trial of Christ. So the first similarity is that in the merchant courtroom scene, and Shylock keeps demanding Antonio's flesh. He's very clear that it is specifically the flesh that he wants. Jesus is the Word of God made flesh. That's at least the terminology that they use in the King James Bible. Now, we actually don't know what translation of the Bible Shakespeare grew up with, so I don't know if we can like exactly ascertain that vocabulary is what Shakespeare, knew as a Christian reference, but it's absolutely what people would think of now. It's even what people would have thought during the time of the performance of Merchant of Venice after the King James translation came out. And of course, the King James translation isn't the only translation that talks about Jesus being the Word of God made flesh. The next thing is that Antonio, who being identified with this fleshly thing, is not in court because of a debt he took on. He's technically he has taken on the debt of someone else. Bassanio wouldn't have the credit in order to get the loan from Shylock, so Antonio has done it instead. He has taken on Bassanio's debt, just as Jesus has taken on everybody who will worship him's debt. And finally, you've got the character who is presiding over these proceedings, so Pontius Pilate and the Duke of Venice, who are supposed to have a lot of power, yet seem very powerless in the face of the law. They both seem to not really want this guy to die, but everybody's yelling, and that is technically what the law says, so I guess we gotta do it. And the final Jewish stereotype that Shylock potentially embodies is a little bit more ambiguous. It's not really implied, it's not really stated in the text, but I think it would be in the minds of the viewers, which is that Jews were cannibals. Now, in Shakespeare's England, the sort of murderous crime that Jews were more associated with was actually poisoning, which isn't present in this play, but in the Middle Ages and beginning of the early modern period, basically if you could think of some sort of horrible, awful thing, you would ascribe it to the Jews. And it's really unclear what Shylock wants to do with Antonio's flesh. He keeps just saying, I want it because I want it, but some people in the audience may be saying like he's gonna grill it and eat it. So that's the small brain interpretation, and to be clear, I'm not saying that if you think this is the correct interpretation of the play that you have a small brain. I'm saying that this is sort of the brain size you are ascribing to Shakespeare relative to the other options. So then we've got normal brain, which is the position that these tropes are present, potentially just because Shakespeare didn't know any better, but they are, or even, and they are mitigated by more sympathetic elements in Shylock's character. So he contains anti-Semitic elements, but also counter-anti-Semitic elements. So we should approach Shylock the same way we would approach Othello, which is that Shakespeare may have incorporated some harmful tropes of his time, but he is genuinely trying to write a complex character. There is evidence for this in a couple lines from the hath not a Jew eyes speech. Hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not want revenge? So that's an appeal to their common humanity. There is actually one part of this that I have a quibble with, which is specifically with Shakespeare. I don't think he fully thought this through. The line, fed with the same food, I have difficulty accepting as true because both in Jewish practice and in medieval and early modern Catholic practice, there were a lot of dietary restrictions, a whole very complex system of dietary restrictions. So there's actually probably, you know, the typical, you could probably look at a meal and identify if that was being eaten by a Jew or a Catholic. There's also the argument that Shylock is presented in a sympathetic light because he is in a genuinely shitty situation. He talks about being spat on and called a dog by Antonio. We never actually see this. However, so some people might say like Shylock is exaggerating or making this up, but in Shakespeare and in other early modern plays, if we get a reported scene, we are meant to interpret that as true because unless there's explicit evidence in the text that we should understand it in a different way, we shouldn't just assume that a character is lying or exaggerating. The text itself was considered the most important part of an Elizabethan or Jacobean play. The content of the play should still be able to be understood even if it's delivered by a mediocre or a bad actor. Also, a lot of scenes that would be too difficult to stage, like giant battles, are reported by other characters, and we need to maintain the trust that the audience has in that. So if someone is going to tell a lie, for example, Edmund in King Lear, it's going to be really explicit. So Edmund first tells the audience, I have constructed this plot where I'm going to get my father to think my brother is trying to kill him, and then I will get money. He also says, I'm going to lie to my brother and say that my father is angry at him so that he will run away and look guilty. We then see him tell his brother, our dad's mad at you, you gotta run away, stage a fake fight with his brother, who then runs off, and then he reports to his father what he told us, the audience, he was going to report, and not what actually happened in the scene. Now, just to make it clear, I am totally cool with reinterpretations of Shakespeare's plays that depend on assuming that a certain line or scene is a lie or is meant to be delivered sarcastically. I kind of think that's the only way you can get your way through Taming of the Shrew in the 21st century. But it's important to remember that that is not the author's intent. So we don't always have to be focused on the author's intent, but when we are talking about the author's intent, we don't want it to confuse it with other interpretations. So with that, we are meant to believe that Antonio is really vile to Shylock, as are Salerno and Solanio. Did I say his name right? Salarino, god damn it, all these Italian names. Also, his daughter does take all of his money. That's not great. And for Shylock in particular, it's not great because having money is how he makes more money. This is emphasized at the end of the courtroom scene when Shylock is being forced to give up his possessions by the Duke, or at the behest of Portia. And he says, "Nay, take my life and all, pardon not that. You take my house when you do take the prop that doth sustain my house. You take my life when you do take the means whereby I live." So because of the legal limits on what kinds of jobs Jewish people could have, Shylock needs money in order to make money. If you take all his money, he can't just go get another job and, rebuild his life. And also, here's the biggest difference between the way Shakespeare's audience would have interpreted the play and the way we are interpreting the play in a modern world, is that to Shakespeare's audience, Shylock gets a happy ending. Shylock is converted into a Christian, which means he has the possibility of going to heaven, whereas when he was a Jew, he was definitely going to go to hell. There is actually another reason to look at this play as redemptive for Shylock, which I discovered when I was doing some research to try to figure out how to talk about this play. I wanted to know, how was Shylock originally performed? And it looks like the first time he was portrayed sympathetically was by Edmund Kean in the early 19th century. In 1741 is when you start to get the villainous approach to Shylock. But according to my research in secondary sources, it seems like before this 18th century switchover, Shylock was originally played as like a comedic oaf. I was really curious in this interpretation, so I went back to see who originated the role. So Shakespeare worked with a pretty similar group of actors across his different plays. He would have known what his actors' talents were, and he would have written roles that allowed them to show off their talents. And the role of Shylock was originated by Richard Burbage, who was actually the leading man of the Lord Chamberlain's men. So other roles he originated include Othello, King Lear, and Hamlet. And Burbage apparently had quite a commanding stage presence, despite being a little bit short. By the way, tangents, short King Lear is inspired, and short Hamlet, amazing. So I feel like the casting of Burbage would have brought at least some seriousness and gravitas to the role, and also, the potential to see somewhat, he's clearly very good at portraying like genuine suffering and mental anguish. At the time Merchant of Venice was written, the main comedic actor of the Lord Chamberlain's men was Will Kemp, who we're not sure, but we think may have played Lancelot Gobbo in this play. So now we will descend deeper into the meme hole and talk about the glowing brain option. And I'll be upfront here and say that this is the one that I think is least likely, but I have heard directors of Merchant of Venice say that this is what they think is going on in the play. And that is that it's all a joke. Antonio and Shylock are friends. Shylock is trying to do him a solid, and this is all kind of just, everything gets a little bit out of hand accidentally. So the argument here is that Antonio has extremely good credit. Everybody in Venice knows he's good for the money. That's all anyone's talking about for the first 3 scenes. He's got 4 ships. 4 ships, bitches! 1 ship goes down, he got 3 more! And that's why it's so horrifically shocking when we hear that all of Antonio's ships have gone down, and why at the end it does make sense that there was just a mail problem and some of his ships did in fact make it to port. Antonio's not broke. He was just broke for exactly long enough for us to have the big dramatic scene. It's fine. So given Antonio's 4 boats, Shylock has no reason to think that Antonio would default on his debt. And Shylock actually would have the opportunity to charge Antonio really high interest. This could be a freaking cash cow. But in this interpretation of the play where Shylock and Antonio are actually buddies, Shylock's like, hey man, I'll do you a solid. I will lend you this money without interest. And then, lol, if you do default, you can I don't know, give me a pound of flesh. That's crazy, that would never happen. So in terms of this thought process's approach to the anti-Semitic content, it's just saying it's not actually there. Now, the reason that I don't find this interpretation particularly convincing is that, man, in that trial scene, Shylock really wants the pound of flesh. And this has nothing to do with any change in the relationship between Shylock and Antonio, who are not in a scene together from Act 1, Scene 3, when they strike the bargain, to Act 3, Scene 3, when Antonio is being arrested. If we want to say that Shylock is joking in Act 1, where he has to be serious in Act 4, the change of heart has to come from Jessica running away. So his daughter leaves, marries a Christian, takes a bunch of his money, buys a freaking monkey, and in reaction to this, Shylock is just lashing out at the nearest Christian at hand. That's not a really positive interpretation. If he somehow switched to instead trying to get a pound of Lorenzo's flesh, that would make sense, but by going after Antonio, we're showing that he's just going after the Christian state of Venice and is using it to kill this guy. So now we have finally arrived at the galaxy brain approach. Do you think Shakespeare was just so smart? You don't have to. Shakespeare wrote some bad plays that don't make sense, guys. It's okay if you think that this is one of them. Now, this approach hangs pretty much entirely on what goes on in the courtroom scene. And it's kind of resting on top of the things we had to accept for the normal brain approach, which is that yes, there are anti-Semitic tropes incorporated in Shylock's character, but he is also a genuinely well-rounded character. You know, he's not a pile of anti-Semitic tropes, and that's his whole character. And it all starts with the quality of mercy speech, which is the speech that Portia delivers to Shylock when he's saying, I will not accept any other amount of money. I'm not even going to allow a surgeon to be present when I make the incision, which means Antonio is definitely going to die. Portia says that because Antonio is not trying to contest this, Shylock has to be merciful. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself, and earthly power doth then show likest God's when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. I have spoke thus much to mitigate the justice of thy plea, which if thou follow, this strict court of Venice must needs give sentence against the merchant here. And of course it was at that point that my camera ran out of batteries, and so I attempted to recharge my camera, but I think I threw the charging cable out because I am an actual idiot. So we are going to be finishing up this video in phone quality. Oh my god. I just hope you can still take me seriously. Anyway, so quality of mercy, that's a speech that we just got. So this is a very Christian speech. This is really a speech illustrating the difference between the Christian God and the Jewish God, at least in the Christian mind. So in modern times when we talk about Old Testament God versus New Testament God. And New Testament God is nice. He wants you to be happy and everybody loves each other. And it's okay if you're poor because I love you. That's how it's talked about now. Different argument as to whether that's actually how the God of the New Testament is portrayed in the New Testament. But Old Testament God blood sacrifices, go to war, kill the children. It's really the difference between justice and mercy, which is what Portia is talking about here. That's explicitly what's going on in the line, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. So Portia is making this clearly Christian argument, which we know is not going to be accepted because she's making it to a Jewish person. And he's like, salvation from freaking what? However, Portia then goes on to show absolutely no mercy.
to Shylock for the rest of the scene. When she comes up with her, oh, you can take flesh, but you can't take blood, lol, try cutting off someone's flesh without making them bleed. For the record, technically, I think Shylock could have like taken a pumice stone to Antonio, just sort of scraped off the outer edges. If you do that for about a month, might end up with a pound. So in the courtroom scene, Portia comes off as completely hypocritical, and honestly, none of the other Christians in that scene are trying to help Shylock either. So this whole Christian mercy concept, which is the thing that the Jewish Shylock lacks, which is like why he's being so mean to Antonio, is in fact a sham. So we're not really saying this play isn't anti-Semitic. We're saying it's misanthropic in general. So like everybody's a terrible person. So the Jews are terrible people, but everybody else is also a terrible person. And there certainly are directors who think that this is the case and who direct the play as though every character in it is just really no good at all. And if we compare Merchant of Venice to Shakespeare's other city comedies, which is inarguably Measure for Measure, and I would argue also Troilus and Cressida, we are in a very similar situation there. Measure for Measure is my favorite Shakespeare play. I don't really like any of the characters in it. Juliet and Friar Peter are okay. But everybody else, yes, including Isabella, I think is a seriously troubled human being. And in Troilus and Cressida, you've got Hector, but like, honestly, everybody else sucks. So if we're reading Merchant of Venice as a full city comedy, we probably should be approaching it with all of these characters are bad people, because that's the world we live in, man. This reading also allows us to fully incorporate the "hath not a Jew I" speech, whereas I only read the middle section, which is the most often quoted section, to support the normal brain hypothesis. Shylock goes on to say, and if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be by Christian example? Why, revenge. The villainy you teach me, I will execute. And it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction. So I think fortunately in approaching the topic of anti-Semitism in the play, I was able to discuss most of the other things that I wanted to bring up about the Merchant of Venice, but you can't make a Merchant of Venice video without at least mentioning the caskets. So I will talk to you about them for a little bit. So first thing that you're probably already aware of is that casket, the word is kind of awkward the way it's used in this play to mean like a little box. It's most often used, at least nowadays, to mean a place where you put a dead body. It's a box for a dead body. And in the 16th century, they did make corpse caskets, body caskets, out of lead. And these caskets were very expensive. They were for the most elite people, like perhaps Portia's father. And they were desirable because they apparently slowed or prevented the natural decaying process. So if you're buried in a lead casket, it's like your body could, survive forever. And then like if you needed on the day of Ascension or something, you got it. I'm not exactly sure what the thinking was, or if it was just the family being uncomfortable with the idea of your rotting flesh. But I think it's really interesting to view the contents of the lead casket that Bassanio picks, not as, or not just as, Portia's counterfeit, but as the body of Portia's father. So when Bassanio eventually, God willing, gets to procreate with Portia, he's really procreating with Portia's dad, in that he is continuing Portia's dad's bloodline, which, Portia's dad was being weird about all this, so that may have been what he wanted, and that's certainly a capitalistic desire, and that's also a comedy desire, to delay mourning. The next thing that happens will be a happy event, and we push away any signs of death. And we are successful in that in comedy, whereas when we try to push away death in tragedy, it doubles back on us and, kills 6 extra people. And we can actually contrast Portia's father, or even the whole setting of Belmont, with Antonio, who appears to be perpetually in mourning. Antonio starts out the play with, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me, you say it wearies you. But how I caught it, found it, or came by it, what stuff 'tis made of, whereof it is born, I am to learn. And such a want wit sadness makes of me, that I have much ado to know myself." Now, this is normally interpreted as a queer pining that Antonio cannot be with Bassanio. And as we know, because Bassanio goes and gets married to a woman, that is something that will be perpetually unfulfilled. So while Antonio is very willing, and sometimes it seems like maybe even desirous of encountering and accepting loss, depression, mourning, the heterosexual union, which if we include Portia's dad in there, is a heterosexual and also homosocial union, represents the antithesis of that, kind of showing us how in this new capitalist society, because we were moving away from agriculture and into money, making money by itself. You're in that final step of the feudal to capitalist transition. We kind of lose the space for homoeroticism or desire between men, because the goal becomes to accumulate wealth to pass on. And there's a real emphasis on the value of, production of items, but also reproduction. So on fertile unions as opposed to unfertile unions. And then going back to this casket situation, the lead casket, if a lead corpse casket preserves the body, presumably a gold or silver casket would not. So the person whose body is stored in such a casket would decay, not continue perpetually, like the princes of Morocco and Aragon. They don't just get to not marry Portia, they have to vow to never marry anybody else. So by choosing the silver or gold caskets, they are cutting short their own genetic lines. They are both literally and figuratively ending the propagation of their flesh. Yeah, that's a good place to end it. Okay, thank you guys very much for watching. I'm so sorry about the camera situation. Whenever I get that fixed, we're gonna talk about Romeo and Juliet. Finally getting there. See you later.